Let me stay, Hannah set her coat white with snow. I will raise your shepherd pups. Grant Whitaker stood in the doorway with two trembling German shepherd puppies pressed against his chest, smoke crawling from the stove behind him and an old military dog growling at his knee. He had survived war. He could not save them alone. Snow fell so thick over Frostline Ridge that the pines outside McCall, Idaho looked less like trees than dark ribs holding up a white sky. By late afternoon, the road to Grant Whitaker's cabin had vanished under wind-packed powder, and every sound in the valley came muffled as if the whole mountain had put a hand over its mouth. Grant stood in the open doorway with two German shepherd puppies pressed against his chest, one tucked under each arm, and for one honest second he looked more frightened than he had ever looked in combat. He was a broad-shouldered man with close-cut brown hair, gray-blue eyes, a thin scar along his jaw, and the frozen stillness of a man who had trained himself not to ask for help. Behind him, milk replacer scorched in a dented pan on the stove. Smoke dragged itself along the ceiling beams. A towel lay half-burned beside the hearth where he had dropped it after trying to warm one pup and feed the other at the same time. Scout, his sable German shepherd with the torn left ear and the stiff back leg, paced at his boot with a low warning in his throat. The puppies were tiny things, barely 5 weeks old, all paws and damp noses and foolish hope. Tucker gave a thin, squeaking whine. Molly did not. That was the sound that cut through Grant worse than the smoke. The small female lay limp against his flannel shirt, her black and tan coat cool where it should have been warm, her little mouth opening and closing without strength. Grant had faced ambushes, explosions, and nights on foreign ground where every shadow seemed to breathe. He had dragged injured men toward helicopters through dust and gunfire. He had kept his voice steady when radios went dead and blood slicked the inside of his gloves. None of that told him how to hold two motherless puppies through a mountain blizzard while the last promise he had made to his wife seemed to be failing in his hands. The stranger on his porch looked as if the storm had built her out of snow and stubbornness. Her dark blonde hair was tied low beneath a gray scarf. Her wool coat had frozen white across the shoulders. Her lips were pale, her boots crusted with ice, and the canvas bag hanging from one hand carried the faint, sharp smell of disinfectant and leather. She was not young enough to be reckless and not old enough to have surrendered to caution. Her brown eyes moved once across Grant, once across the puppies, once toward the smoke. Then she stepped closer without asking permission to look brave. "Your milk is burning," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost ordinary, which made the room behind Grant feel more chaotic by comparison. Grant blinked as if language had become one more thing the storm had buried. "Who are you?" "Hannah Pierce. My truck slid into the ditch about a mile down. I was headed toward Warren Creek before the county closed the road." She looked at Molly again. "May I?" Scout's growl deepened. Grant tightened his grip. "He's not friendly with strangers." Hannah glanced at the old dog, not staring him down, not smiling in that foolish way people did when they thought every dog could be charmed. "Good. A dog like that should not be friendly with strangers." Something in Scout's ears changed. Not trust, not yet. More like he had been insulted accurately and found it acceptable. Grant almost laughed. It came out as a breath. Molly made another weak motion with her mouth, and the thin sound died before it became a cry. Hannah took one more step. "She is fading." That broke whatever pride Grant had left. He handed Molly over with the hesitation of a man passing a live coal. Hannah took the pup against the inside of her coat where body heat still lingered beneath the frozen wool. She did not shake her. She did not rub hard. She cupped one hand around the puppy's chest and slipped 2 fingers beneath the tiny jaw, feeling for the faint beat and swallow. "Towel," she said. Grant did not move. "Now, Mr. Whitaker." The name seemed to strike him. Few strangers knew it, though the whole county knew enough about the retired Navy SEAL who lived above Frostline with a widow's empty kennel and one bad-tempered dog. He snatched a clean towel from the back of a chair. Hannah wrapped Molly loosely, leaving her nose clear, then moved toward the stove and turned the smoking pan away from the heat. Not hot, warm. Puppies this small do not forgive big corrections. I know that, Grant said, and hated the sharpness in his own voice. Hannah did not flinch. Then your hands forgot for a minute. That was worse because it was kind. Tucker squirmed under Grant's other arm, rooting blindly at his shirt buttons. Grant looked down as if surprised to find the male pup still alive. His mother died yesterday. I guessed. Hannah reached into her bag with one hand and pulled out a small rubber nipple, a narrow bottle, and a folded cloth pouch that smelled faintly of clean metal. How much has she taken? Not enough. How much? He swallowed. The smoke stung his eyes, or maybe it was not smoke. I do not know. The words landed heavily. A man like Grant Whitaker did not like not knowing. He wore control the way other men wore coats buttoned high at the throat, but grief had stripped him badly. Leah, his wife, had been the one who knew the whelping charts, the rescue records, the names of every frightened dog that had ever crossed their threshold. She had died 11 months ago on an icy highway outside Boise while transporting a sick shepherd from a shelter. The female who gave birth to Tucker and Molly had been Leah's last rescue, and now she was gone too. Taken by infection before Grant could get a vet through the snow. 2 pups remained. 2 small warm deaths to the dead. Hannah set the bottle in a mug of warm water, tested the liquid against the inside of her wrist, then slid the nipple carefully into Molly's mouth. The puppy did not latch. Hannah waited. Her own hands were cracked from cold but steady. She touched a drop of milk to the pup's tongue. Molly swallowed once, then again. Scout stopped growling. Grant stared. The cabin held its breath with him. Outside, snow piled against the porch rail until the world beyond the door became a blank page no one could read. Let me stay, Hannah said without looking up. I will raise your shepherd pups through this storm. Grant's eyes hardened by instinct. I do not know you. No. Molly drew a weak sip from the bottle. You know she is warmer than she was a minute ago. Tucker yipped, offended by the unfair distribution of supper. Scout gave him a look of ancient disappointment. Hannah's mouth twitched. And you know your boy has opinions. Grant looked from the stranger to the old military dog, then to the little female making a fragile, stubborn effort against Hannah's palm. What do you want? A place near the fire until the road's open. Food, if you have it. A dry corner for my bag. Wages? No. She adjusted the towel around Molly's ribs. I have been a veterinary technician, a rescue volunteer, and a woman with nowhere to sleep in January. Tonight the last one is the least useful thing about me. Grant glanced toward the north hallway where the kennel room door stood closed and locked. He heard Leah in memory laughing at him because he could field strip a rifle blindfolded, but needed instructions to warm formula. He heard her saying a home was not made safe by strength, it was made safe by attention. The wind slammed the cabin hard enough to rattle the pans. Scout turned sharply toward the dark hall. The hair along his shoulders rose. Hannah saw it. So did Grant. From beyond the locked kennel room came a sound too faint to belong to the storm. A wet, slow drip, steady as a clock. Grant shifted Tucker higher against his chest. That room is off limits. Hannah kept the bottle angled, her eyes on Molly's throat as the puppy swallowed again. Then I hope whatever is leaking in there knows that. Scout stepped between Hannah and the hallway, planted his good leg, and growled once, not at her now, but at the door. Morning came to Frostline Ridge without sunrise, only a gray thinning of the storm pressed against the windows. Snow climbed the lower panes of Grant Whitaker's cabin, and the pines beyond the porch had disappeared so completely that the house seemed to be drifting alone through a cold sea. Hannah Pierce had slept less than an hour in the chair beside the stove, her boots still on her scarf, loosened but not removed. One hand tucked around a bottle to keep it from cooling too fast. Grant found her there before dawn with Tucker against her forearm and Molly inside a sling made from an old towel tied across her chest. Scout lay near her feet. That more than anything stopped him. The old dog had not slept near a stranger since the night Grant brought him home from his last deployment, when Scout still woke snarling at sounds no human ear could catch. Yet there he was, nose pointed toward Hannah's boot, one torn ear twitching every time a log settled in the stove. Grant did not comment. Men like him often mistook silence for manners when it was mostly fear. Hannah opened one eye. Milk every 2 hours until they take more at once. Her voice was rough from smoke and lack of sleep. Molly swallowed better after midnight. Tucker has the appetite of a small criminal. Tucker, hearing his name or simply recognizing slander, wriggled in protest. Grant took 2 steps closer. "You should have woken me. You fell asleep standing up once. That did not happen. Your left knee gave out and you apologized to the firewood." Scout huffed. It sounded suspiciously like agreement. Grant looked at the dog. "You stay out of this." For the first time in weeks, maybe months, a small living thing passed through the cabin that was not grief or smoke or wind. Not laughter exactly. The beginning of it. Hannah did not hold on to the moment. She had work to do, and work properly done was sometimes mercy wearing plain clothes. She set Molly in a shallow wooden crate lined with clean towels, then pressed 2 fingers under the bedding. "Cold from below," she said. "The room is warm enough at shoulder height, but they are lying where the floor keeps breathing winter into them." Grant looked around the cabin as if seeing it for the first time. 3 rooms stood open off the main space. The north hallway pulled a thread of cold air toward the locked kennel room. A dining table sat too far from the stove, stacked with unopened mail, old whelping records, a coil of leash rope, and the kind of tools a man sets down when he intends to return to himself later. Later had not come. "This house was fine last winter," Grant said. "Last winter Leah was here." Hannah said it gently, but no softness could keep the name from striking. Grant's jaw tightened. Scout lifted his head. For a moment, even the stove seemed to quiet down. Hannah looked at Grant straight. "I am not insulting her. I am saying she was part of the heating system." That answer left him no clean place to put his anger. She stood slow enough not to startle Scout and began moving the chairs closer to the hearth. Grant watched her drag the table across the plank floor with a scraping groan. "What are you doing?" "Making the house smaller. It is already small. Not to a puppy." She pointed with her chin toward the open rooms. "Every doorway is stealing warm air. Every empty corner is asking the stove to care about space nobody is using. Shut the rooms you do not need. Roll towels under the doors. Move the crates here. Hang blankets from those beams if you have blankets. You have been here less than a day. The cold has been here longer. I am listening to it." Grant did not move. Hannah kept working. She found 2 old wool blankets in a cedar chest by the stairs, shook them out and paused when the scent of lavender rose from the folds. Grant's face changed. Those were Leah's. Hannah laid them across the back of the chair, not the floor. "Then you hang them." It was a small mercy. He hated that he noticed. He hated more that he needed it. With stiff hands, he tied the blankets from the low beams near the stove, creating a smaller winter room around the hearth. The crates and the chair where Hannah had kept watch. She used 2 broom handles and a length of line from her bag to give the cloth shape so it did not drape too close to the stove. Then she closed the unused room's stuffed rolled towels at the thresholds and placed Tucker and Molly in a broader crate raised on two boards. "Not beside the stove," she said when Grant reached for the crate. "Near it, heat should arrive like a hand, not a slap." Grant set the crate where she pointed. His shoulder twinged under the weight of almost nothing. An old injury deep in the joint answered weather before the barometer did. He ignored it, which had never once made it go away. Hannah filled 2 mugs with warm water and placed one outside the blanket wall, one inside. "We wait." "For what?" "Proof you will believe because you can touch it." 4 hours later, the mug outside had gone lukewarm. The one inside still held heat against Grant's fingers. He did not praise her. He moved his cot mattress closer to the winter room and said nothing while Hannah pretended not to see. By evening, both puppies had taken more milk. Molly's gums looked less pale. Tucker had discovered he could complain before, during, and after feeding. Scout tolerated this with the weary dignity of an elder statesman whose country had made poor choices. Hannah rubbed the sable dog's shoulder once, just above the stiff hip. Scout allowed it for 3 seconds before standing as if he had important business elsewhere. "He likes you," Grant said, surprising himself. "He is reviewing my application. He bites. So do frightened people." Grant looked toward the north hallway. The locked kennel room had been quiet all day except for the drip. It had slowed when the wind shifted, then returned after dark. Hannah had not asked again, but she kept glancing at the towel beneath the door. It was damp now along one edge. "That room stays closed," Grant said. "I heard you the first time. Leah kept her rescue files there. Whelping supplies, personal things. Then the leak has excellent taste." His eyes snapped toward her, but Hannah's face held no mockery. "Water does not respect grief, Grant. It will ruin her things whether you are ready to touch them or not." The first use of his name hit softer than he expected. Outside, the wind dragged loose snow across the roof in long sandpaper strokes. Inside the crate, Molly sneezed, then shivered. Hannah bent fast, touched the bedding, and frowned. "Too damp." Grant stepped forward. "You said it was working." "It was. Now it is working badly." She lifted the puppies one by one into warm towels, then stripped the crate. The lower towel felt dry at first touch, but clammy beneath the top fold where their breath and body heat had collected under the blanket she had laid too close across the opening. She did not defend herself. She did not pretend the damp came from somewhere else. "I trapped moisture." Grant watched her remove the top covering, replace every lining, and prop a folded cloth along the back to make a small sheltered wall without closing the air above them. "So you were wrong." "For about 20 minutes. Then the puppies told me." "They did." Tucker opened his mouth and released a squeak that sounded like a rusty hinge giving up on life. Hannah nodded solemnly. Tucker's report was strongly worded. The corner of Grant's mouth moved before he could stop it. Then the drip sounded again, louder now, followed by a soft patter like water striking paper. Scout rose. This time he did not growl. He walked to the north hall and looked back at Grant, tail low, eyes bright with command. Grant's hand went to the key on the nail beside the stove before he seemed to realize he had reached for it. He froze, their fingers inches away. Hannah gathered Molly against her chest. "If there are towels, formula, or records in there," she said, "we may need them before morning." Grant took the key down. It felt colder than the room. At the end of the hall, he slid it into the lock and stood breathing through his nose like a man about to open more than a door. When the latch clicked, Scout pushed forward, then stopped so suddenly his nails scraped the floor. From inside the dark kennel room came the sour smell of wet wood, old paper, and something else. Milk gone bad. Grant whispered Leah's name before the door swung open. The storm pressed hard against Frostline Ridge before dawn, and the north side of the cabin wore snow like a weight it had not agreed to carry. inside the opened kennel room. The air felt colder than the hallway, damp enough that Grant could smell winter in the wood itself. He stood in the doorway with the key still in his hand. Unable to cross the threshold, Hannah did not hurry him. Scout slipped past first, his nails clicking softly, his torn ear angled toward the corner where water had fallen through a narrow crack near the old vent pipe. A metal pail sat beneath it, almost full. The drip struck the surface with a patient sound. Plink, plink, plink. On shelves along the wall stood the life Grant had locked away, folded towels, puppy collars, too small for any grown dog. Milk bottles, syringes without needles, jars of disinfectant, clean rags tied with twine, and rescue files labeled in Leah Whitaker's neat handwriting. Foster intake, whelping notes, emergency winter supplies. The labels were simple. They nearly took his knees out from under him. Leah's navy coat still hung from a peg near the door. Her boots sat below at toes, pointing inward as if she had kicked them off after a long day and meant to come back once the kettle boiled. Beside the work table, a corkboard held photographs of dogs she had rescued, each picture pinned beside a date and a tiny note. Found behind a feed store. Afraid of men in hats. Loves biscuits. Hates baths. Grant looked at none of them directly. He stared at the wet patch creeping across the lower shelf where the corner of a cardboard box had sagged. "I should have checked," he said. His voice did not sound like his own. Hannah set Molly into the warmed crate Grant had carried from the winter room and tucked Tucker beside her. "You are checking now. That is not the same." "No." She did not offer him a cheap pardon. He respected her for that, though respect was an uncomfortable thing to feel while standing in the ruins of his own neglect. Hannah moved with care, touching nothing personal until necessary. She lifted the damp cardboard box from the shelf and set it on the table. Inside were packets of powdered formula, several ruined at the edges, the paper soft and clumped. Grant made a sound deep in his throat. That was the last case Leah ordered. "Then let us save what is still good." Hannah sorted packet by packet, pressing each seam, smelling for sourness, checking for lumps. Anything compromised went into one basin. Anything dry went into a clean tin. She did the same with bandages, towels, and the small fleece squares Leah had cut for newborn pups. "You are throwing away half of it. The wet did that before I came in." Grant hated how close that was to the truth. He had fought the idea of opening the room because he thought closed doors could preserve what mattered. But the mountain had been entering by drops, small enough to ignore until the damage had a smell. Scout nudged a fallen towel with his nose and sneezed at the mildew. "Thank you for the professional assessment," Hannah murmured. The old dog gave her a narrow look. Grant almost smiled again, then caught sight of Leah's handwriting on a bin near the floor. "Dry towels for pups, used before cotton." The bin sat against the outside wall. Hannah knelt and slid it forward. The boards beneath were dark. "Do not!" Grant said too sharply. Hannah stopped. Her hand remained on the bin. "I can leave it." He looked at the damp wood, then at the words Leah had written, and something in him shifted from protection to responsibility. "No, move it." Together they lifted the bin onto the table. The bottom towel layer had gone cold and wet. Hannah peeled the sound towels from the top and laid them near the stove, not too close, just enough to dry slowly. The spoiled ones went aside. "We need raised shelves," she said. "Air below." Space between bins, nothing pressed against the north wall. "The road is closed. I cannot go buy lumber. Scrap wood." Grant gave a grim little laugh. "I live on a mountain and used to believe I was handy." "Then there is scrap wood." By mid-morning, Roy Benton arrived in a red wool cap crusted white, stomping snow from his boots, and bringing with him the smell of cold iron tobacco and honest work. He was 58, lean as a fence rail, with a navy tattoo faded blue on one wrist and the posture of a man who had learned not to waste either words or nails. Saw smoke acting wrong, he said. Thought your pipe backed up. His eyes moved from Hannah to the open kennel room, then to Grant's face. Well, that was all. Grant braced for pity. Roy offered none. He leaned into the room, sniffed once, and pointed toward the wet shelf. Vent flashing. Hannah nodded. And ground moisture behind the lower bins. Roy looked at her a moment longer, reassessing. You know kennels. Enough to know damp kills quietly. Quiet things are the meanest. He set down his tool roll and got to work. He and Grant pulled warped boards from an old shipping crate outside the woodshed, while Hannah carried supplies from the kennel room to the winter space, counting under her breath and writing on a slate she found behind the sink. Formula packets safe, towels drying, clean syringes 4, disinfectant half bottle, cotton wraps 12. Grant noticed she never wrote over Leah's labels. If a tag had Leah's handwriting, Hannah turned it over and marked the back with the inspection date. If a file lay in the way, she moved it with both hands and set it on a dry chair as though the paper had bones. Roy noticed too. Most folks would make a fresh pile and call it organizing. Hannah pressed a damp towel between her fingers. Most folks lose things that way. Grant stood by the table holding a bin of rescued supplies, his left shoulder aching, his right hand black with dust. Leah had a system. She still does, Hannah said. We just have to keep it breathing. The words lodged inside him, not like a knife, like a nail driven straight into good wood. By afternoon, Roy had built slatted shelves raised several inches off the floor with narrow walkways between bins and enough space behind them for air to move. Hannah left the north wall bare except for hooks high enough to stay dry. Grant cleaned the vent pipe flashing from inside as best he could while Roy patched the outer gap with a flattened piece of tin and roofing nails that protested the cold. The drip slowed, then stopped. Everyone stood listening to the silence it left behind. Tucker chose that sacred moment to soil a towel with great satisfaction. Roy looked down at him. That one has leadership qualities. Hannah shook her head, smiling despite herself. That one has timing. Grant took the ruined towel without being asked. It was not heroism. It was laundry. Somehow that made it harder and better. Near dusk, while Hannah sorted Leah's files by date so they could dry flat, a small black notebook slipped from between two folders and landed under the table. Scout pawed it once. Grant bent, but his fingers hovered above the cover. The notebook was Leah's field book, the one she kept in her coat pocket when she drove to shelters and back road calls. Hannah saw his face and stepped away. You do not have to open it tonight. Grant turned the notebook over. The elastic band had snapped from age. On the first page, Leah had written the names of pregnant females, birth dates, emergency feeding formulas, notes about dogs that panicked at thunder, dogs that loved hymn music, dogs that stole mittens. He thumbed toward the back without meaning to and found the last page with writing on it. The ink slanted sharply as if Leah had written in a moving truck. If winter comes early, save the north room first. It holds the pups, the records, and the work after I am gone. Grant did not breathe. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering tracks as soon as they were made. Hannah looked from the notebook to the locked expression returning to his face. Grant. He closed the book too fast. From the winter room, Molly cried out, not weak now, but sharp and hungry. Scout turned toward the sound, then back to Grant, as if telling him the dead had left instructions and the living were waiting. The next morning brought a pale blue cold over Frostline Ridge. The dangerous kind that follows a night of snow and makes every fence wire sing under ice. The storm had eased but not ended, and the cabin stood waist-deep in white silence. Silence while Grant Whitaker sat at the kitchen table with Leah's field notebook closed beneath his hand. He had not slept. Hannah knew because he had fed Tucker at 3 warmed stones at 4, checked the patched vent at 5, and stared at nothing between every chore. Men who had been trained to endure often mistook exhaustion for loyalty. Hannah had seen it in old ranchers, rescue workers, and widows who kept casseroles in the freezer for husbands no one would bring home. Grant had that same hard, haunted economy in him. He spent himself carefully and called it strength. At dawn, she set a mug of coffee near his elbow. "You should eat. I ate yesterday. That is not a system. You talk about systems like they are prayers. Done right, they answer more often." Grant looked at her then, not warmly, not unkindly either. Leah wrote that room mattered. She was right. She wrote after I'm gone. His fingers tightened over the notebook. She knew she was doing dangerous work in winter. She knew the roads. I should have made her stop. Hannah checked the temperature in the puppy's crate before replying. Tucker lay sprawled over Molly like a tiny king with poor manners. Molly's breathing had steadied. Her paws twitched in sleep. Would she have stopped? Grant gave a humorless breath. No. Then blaming yourself gives you a job that looks like love, but never finishes. The words were quiet. They struck anyway. Grant stood abruptly, chair legs scraping, and Scout lifted his head from the rug. You have known me 2 days. Long enough to see you are carrying punishment in both hands. It leaves no room to carry the living. He looked toward the north room. Anger moved across his face, but under it was grief so raw she nearly looked away. Do not talk like you know what she would want, Hannah nodded once. Fair. She picked up the bottle for Molly and sat beside the crate. Then read what she wrote. He did not answer. Outside wind dragged loose snow from the roof in soft avalanches. The patched vent held. The room no longer smelled of wet paper. That alone felt like a small resurrection. Grant opened the notebook after breakfast. He did it when Hannah was washing bottles and Roy was tightening a shelf bracket in the north room, as if pretending he was not doing anything important might make it bearable. Leah's notes filled the pages in tidy, practical lines. Use wool under cotton when floor is cold. Never cover crate fully. Damp lungs are worse than cool noses. Count formula by feed, not by packet. If Grant forgets to sleep, ask Scout to lean on him. Grant stopped there. Scout, who had been licking a paw by the stove, looked up with the offended dignity of a dog accused of competence. Hannah hid her smile in the steam rising from the wash basin. Grant read on. Leah had recorded names, weights, medicines, weather patterns, and small mercies. Daisy likes being sung to, but only old hymns. Carver's dogs bark at blue tarps. Roy knows how to brace a sagging roof but will complain first for tradition. Then near the end, a page titled, For the Litter If I Am Not Home. Grant's breath snagged. Hannah set the bottle brush down. He read in silence, shoulders drawn tight. Leah had written feeding intervals, warming instructions, warning signs. And one sentence that made his face change completely. Do not let grief make the house smaller than the love that built it. He closed his eyes. For a while nobody moved. Then Molly sneezed so hard she rolled sideways into Tucker, and Tucker woke furious at the injustice of physics. Roy muttered from the doorway, That boy will sue somebody before spring. Grant laughed once. It broke halfway through, but it was real. Hannah used Leah's notes to refine the system, but she refused to write in the notebook. Instead, she hung a small slate board beside the stove. Milk taken, crate dry, room temp, clean towels, firewood. She wrote with charcoal big enough for tired eyes. Grant watched her leave Leah's field book closed on the shelf above the work table. There are blank pages, he said. I know. You could use them. No. Hannah wiped charcoal dust from her thumb. Those are hers. This can be ours for now. The word ours arrived before either of them was ready. Grant looked away first. Scout did not. He watched both humans with the weary patience of a creature who had already solved the matter and was waiting for them to catch up. Over the next 2 days, the cabin changed rhythm. Hannah rose before daylight to warm milk and check the crate lining for damp. Grant split wood in shorter sessions so his shoulder did not lock. Roy repaired the outer kennel door and built a low shelf for bottles near the stove. Scout supervised with imperial severity, occasionally stealing a clean sock and depositing it beside the puppies as if contributing supplies. Tucker gained weight. Molly's gums pinked. Their coats began to fluff and the smell of warm puppy replaced sour milk and smoke. Grant still did not trust peace. He walked the rooms at night, checked latches twice, listened for drips that had stopped. Hannah did not tell him to quit. She gave him better things to check. Touch the lower bedding. If your knuckles feel moisture, change it. Like this. Yes. How warm should the bottle be? Like a wrist you would not pull away from. That is not a measurement. It is for anything alive. On the third afternoon, a truck engine growled beyond the white-packed road. Scout shot to his feet. Grant turned toward the window. Through the blowing snow came a white pickup with chains biting at the buried drive, its headlights 2 dull moons. It slid once near the fence, corrected, then rolled to a stop beside the porch. Grant's face hardened in a way Hannah had not seen before. Not combat. Family. "Who is it?" she asked. He did not answer until the driver's door opened and a woman in a burgundy wool coat stepped into the snow with a covered basket in one hand and 2 small pet carriers in the truck bed. She was in her early 60s, silver hair pinned beneath a hat mouth set in the firm line of someone who had practiced grief until it looked like authority. "Miriam Ellis," Grant said. "Leah's mother." Hannah looked toward Tucker and Molly. The puppies slept under a fleece square Leah had cut with her own hands. "She came for them," Grant's silence answered. Miriam climbed the porch without waving. She looked past Grant when he opened the door, past Hannah, past Roy, and directly toward the winter room where the crate sat near the stove. Scout stood between her and the puppies but did not growl. He remembered her. That made the moment worse. Miriam removed her gloves finger by finger. Her eyes rested on Hannah's face for the first time. "Are you the woman staying in my daughter's house?" Snow hissed against the window. Tucker woke and made a hungry little cry. Hannah wiped her hands on a clean towel and stood. "Yes, ma'am." Miriam's gaze moved to the slate board, the rescued towels, the field notebook untouched on Leah's shelf. "Then I suppose you can explain why a stranger is raising Leah's last shepherds." Snow softened for 1 misleading hour over Frostline Ridge, falling in slow flakes that glittered against the cabin windows like the storm had decided to become beautiful before becoming cruel. Miriam Ellis stood inside Grant Whitaker's kitchen without removing her coat, her eyes traveling across every corner with the painful precision of a mother searching for what had been taken from her. Hannah knew that look. It did not belong to suspicion alone. It belonged to love with nowhere safe to go. Miriam went first to the puppies. Scout watched from beside the crate, body still torn, ear tipped forward. Grant stood near the stove with his arms folded, though the posture did not hide the tremor in his left hand. Roy Benton suddenly found urgent business with the hinge on the kennel door and stepped outside with more delicacy than his boots suggested. Hannah moved aside. "Molly fed at 6, Tucker at 5:30 because he was dramatic." Miriam did not smile. She knelt, one gloved hand hovering above the crate. "May I?" "Of course." Hannah warmed her own fingers before lifting Molly and placing her into Miriam's hands. The older woman's stern face changed so quickly it almost hurt to watch. Her mouth softened. Her shoulders dropped. Molly rooted against the wool cuff and made a tiny sound, blind and trusting. Miriam closed her eyes. Leah said the female had a white star on her chest. She does. Hannah parted the soft fur with one finger, showing the small pale patch. Miriam touched it as if touching a relic. Tucker, unwilling to be outshone by celestial markings, shoved his head over the crate edge and squeaked. Scout gave him a low rumble which Hannah had learned meant not danger, just manners. Miriam looked at the old dog. "You are thinner." Scout blinked. Grant answered for him. "He is offended you noticed." The attempt at humor drifted into the room and fell not dead but undecided. Miriam set Molly back with care, then stood and began her inspection. She checked the bottle temperature, the drying towels, the raised shelves in the north room, the formula tins, the slate board by the stove. She lifted a bin tag and turned it over, seeing Hannah's inspection date written on the back, while Leah's handwriting remained untouched on the front. Her expression tightened. "You have been through all of her things." Grant took a step forward. Hannah spoke before he could. "Only the supplies needed to keep them alive. And her notebook. I read what Grant chose to share. I have not written in it." Miriam looked toward the shelf where Leah's field book rested. "Why not?" Hannah wiped milk from Tucker's chin with a square of cloth Leah had cut months before her death. "Because those pages are not empty just because no ink is on them." The kitchen went quiet. Grant looked at Hannah as if she had moved a weight he had been pushing against for nearly a year. Miriam's eyes narrowed, but pain stood behind the narrowness. "Do you believe you have become something here? Useful, I hope." "That is not what I asked." Hannah set Tucker down beside Molly. "No, ma'am. I do not believe I have become Leah. I do not believe Grant needs another Leah. I do not believe these dogs need someone pretending grief can be tidied away." Miriam's face flushed. "You speak boldly for a woman who arrived 2 nights ago." "The storm did not ask how long I had been here before it started killing what was wet and cold." Grant inhaled sharply. Hannah thought she had gone too far. Then Miriam looked toward the north room and saw the shelf of rescued towels. The dry formula, the old labels still tied in place. Her anger did not vanish, but it lost a little footing. "Leah built this rescue from nothing," she said. "She brought home broken animals when she could barely keep her own house clean. The house was clean enough for love." Miriam's eyes flicked back. Hannah kept her voice level. "I saw the records. Dogs came in underweight, afraid, injured. They left with names, weights, vaccinations, and notes about whether they liked hymn music. That is not nothing." Miriam swallowed. Grant looked away. Scout shifted beside the crate, then lowered his head onto the edge as if ending testimony. For the rest of the day, Miriam remained. She did not offer help at first. She sat near the stove watching. She watched Hannah feed Molly, slowly stopping when the pup swallowed air. She watched Grant change bedding without being told. She watched Scout nudge Tucker back when he wriggled too far from warmth. When Hannah missed a drop of milk on the towel, Miriam pointed it out. When Grant overheated a bottle, Miriam said Leah would have scolded him into next week. "She did," Grant said. Miriam's mouth twitched. By evening, the storm thickened again. The barometer beside the door sagged lower. Roy came back with split kindling and news that the county road below had drifted shut. Behind him came the growl of another engine. Wayne Carver rolled up in a blue pickup crowned with snow. A man of 46 with a square jaw, wind-reddened cheeks, and the cheerful arrogance of someone who had survived enough winters to believe survival had become a personal talent. He stamped onto the porch and knocked with the side of his fist. "Grant, you alive in there, or did the puppies file a complaint?" Scout barked once, not amused. Grant opened the door halfway. Wayne leaned in, saw Hannah, Miriam, the blanket wall, the raised crates, and the slate board. His grin widened. "Well now, looks like the rescue got itself a school teacher." Hannah continued washing a bottle. "Only for advanced students." Roy coughed into his glove. Wayne glanced toward the north wall where Hannah had stacked temporary sacks and boards to block a draft. "What is all that? Not enough yet," Hannah said. "The north side is bleeding heat." Wayne laughed. "That wall has stood 20 winters." Grant began to answer, then stopped. Hannah noticed the stopping. So did Miriam. Wayne looked pleased with himself. "You folks planning to tuck the cabin in for the night?" "If it behaves," Hannah said. "If it does not, I may read its scripture." Miriam almost smiled. Almost. Wayne did not catch the humor. He shook his head. "Town says we might get another foot, maybe 2. Nothing Frostline has not seen." Hannah looked at the horses in Wayne's trailer through the porch gap, their backs turned toward the western ridge heads low. "Your animals disagree." Wayne waved that away. "Animals always act dramatic before weather." Tucker squeaked from the crate. Hannah looked down. "Some are experts." Wayne laughed again and rode back toward his place before full dark, leaving tire tracks that the snow began filling at once. Miriam stood by the window watching the white close over the ruts. "He sounds like men who call caution fear. Usually right before asking to borrow rope," Roy said. Night settled hard. Grant checked the patched vent, then the towels, then the stove. He paused beside Hannah. "Earlier with Miriam. I know I spoke too much." "No." He rubbed his scarred jaw. "You spoke when I should have." From the north room came a sudden sound above them, a long, dry scrape in the rafters. Everyone looked up. Snow slid somewhere on the roof and stopped with a heavy thud instead of falling free. Then from the kennel ceiling beyond the hall came a thin, cracking note. Not loud, worse than loud, precise. Scout rose in one motion and stared toward the dark. Wind returned before sunrise to Frostline Ridge, driving loose snow sideways across the cabin until the windows looked buried in moving flour. The north wall of Grant Whitaker's kennel gave off a cold that seemed to have intent behind it in the crack. Hannah had heard in the rafters, lingered in the house like a question no one wanted to answer. Grant climbed a ladder before breakfast against Hannah's advice and Roy's vocabulary to check the ceiling beam above the kennel room. He came down with sawdust on one shoulder and a hard line around his mouth. "No break. No comfort either," Roy said. "That beam is talking." Grant glared at him. "It has held through worse. So have you. Does not mean you are not tired." That landed badly, but Grant had learned in the short and uncomfortable season since Hannah arrived that being irritated did not make a thing untrue. Hannah was already outside, wrapped in a scarf up to her eyes, examining the north wall where snow had drifted and packed against the lower logs. Scout followed her, leaving 3 good paw marks and 1 dragged line from his stiff back leg. Tucker and Molly remained in the winter room with Miriam, who had announced she would feed the noisy one only if Hannah confirmed the bottle temperature, then proceeded to hold Tucker like a chapel candle while calling him a tyrant in a voice soft enough to make Grant turn away. Outside, Hannah brushed snow from the wall and pressed her glove to the wood near 2 old nail heads. Frost had feathered around them inside the kennel. Not much. Enough. "We need a windbreak," she said when Grant joined her. "Something outside, not pressed to the wall. Air gap between. Lumber is short. Hay bales." He frowned. "I have straw bedding. Some old hay from last year, too stemmy for the horses." Roy scratched his beard. "Dry mostly." Hannah pointed toward the slight rise beside the cabin. "We stack it on flat stone so it does not wick moisture from below. Canvas over the top at an angle. Leave space behind it so the wall can breathe." Grant looked at the gray-white sky. "If it gets wet, it freezes into a problem. Then we build it so water leaves before it gets comfortable." Roy chuckled. "I like her. She insults weather like it is a lazy hired man." Grant did not say he liked her. He began hauling stones. The work was brutal in the cold. Every bale felt heavier than its size, crusted with snow on the twine and shedding sharp stems against their wrists. Hannah made them lift the first row twice because the stone base sat uneven. Grant's shoulder flared hot, then numb. Roy saw it and took the next bale from him without comment, which was the only reason Grant allowed it. Scout supervised from the porch after deciding the snow was both beneath his dignity and too deep for his leg. Wayne Carver rode past near noon on a snowmobile, pulling up long enough to lift his goggles. "Well, I will be." He laughed so loudly it carried over the wind. "Grant, she has you feeding the house instead of the dogs." Hannah wedged a stone under a corner and did not look up. "The house eats heat. I prefer to choose the diet." Wayne slapped the handlebar. "You folks are going to make the whole ridge soft. Next thing you will tie ribbons from the porch so nobody gets lost between the kitchen and the privy." "Blue is a good color," Hannah said. Roy grinned. Grant kept stacking. Wayne lingered, perhaps hoping Grant would join the joke. Grant felt the old habit rise in him, the one that stepped back from Hannah's ideas in public so no one would mistake him for a man led by a stranger. He looked at the wall, at Hannah's raw hands, at the kennel where Leah's last pup slept because Hannah had refused to let pride manage temperature. "We need another row," he said. Wayne's smile thinned. "Suit yourself." He rode on, engine whining into the white. Hannah did not thank Grant. She did not need to. By mid-afternoon, the hay wall stood along the windward side, separated from the cabin by a hand's width of air. Canvas sloped over the top and tied down with rope. It looked odd. It also slowed the wind enough that Grant felt the difference on his cheeks when he stepped behind it. Hannah drove one iron nail through a scrapboard set against the protected wall and another on the exposed east side. "We compare in the morning." "If there is a morning," Roy muttered, eyeing the sky. Grant nearly smiled. Then Hannah found the wet corner. It was small, hidden where the canvas sagged over the lowest bale and meltwater from the roof drip had run along the twine. She pulled off her glove and touched the damp with bare fingers. Her jaw set. "This corner comes down." Grant stared. "We just finished. Then we are fortunate to find the mistake while we still have hands warm enough to fix it." Roy groaned like a man asked to bury himself, standing up, then reached for the rope. Grant expected Hannah to defend the design, to blame the canvas, the roof, the angle of the drift. She did none of that. She dismantled the corner, raised the stone base, cut a shallow trench through the snow so meltwater would move away, then rebuilt the bales tighter and higher. Her fingers shook by the end, not from fear, not only from cold. Grant took off one glove and closed her hand. Between both of his for a moment, warming her knuckles without speaking. She looked at him quickly. So did he. Then Tucker chose that exact moment to howl from inside the cabin, as if abandoned in the wilderness by heartless society. Roy coughed. "Romance interrupted by livestock, classic Idaho." Hannah pulled her hand away, cheeks pink from more than wind. Grant found suddenly that he could breathe. Evening fell early. Inside, Miriam reported that Molly had taken nearly a full feeding and Tucker had tried to chew the bottle nipple with the authority of a wolf twice his size. Grant checked the nail heads before bed. The protected one already felt less bitter against his fingertip. The exposed one stung with cold. He said nothing, but when Hannah stepped outside to retie the canvas, he followed with a lantern. "You do not have to prove it to Wayne," he said. "I know. Then why the nails? So you do not have to believe me. You can believe Frost." Grant looked at the faint white ring forming around the exposed nail. The mountain was writing in its own hand. After midnight, the crack came again. Louder this time. Not from the wall. From above the kennel where old snow had packed against new and frozen into a single heavy sheet. The pantry door near the hall gave a sudden scrape across the floor as if the frame had shifted. Scout sprang up, barking. In the winter room, Molly woke, crying. Grant ran toward the kennel with a lantern, Hannah at his heels, and when the flame caught the ceiling beam, they both saw the narrow, dark line opening along the grain. The morning over Frostline Ridge was white, windless, and terribly heavy, with fresh snow lying over the frozen roof like a second roof made of stone. Grant Whitaker stood in the kennel doorway, staring at the dark line along the beam. His jaw clenched so hard, Hannah could see the muscle twitch near his scar. The house had not failed. Not yet. That was the mercy and the warning together. Roy Benton tapped the pantry door with 2 fingers, then pushed it. The bottom edge scraped the floor with a stubborn wooden groan. "Frame is under load." Grant looked up. "The beam is not broken. Neither is a man's heart until people keep stepping on it." Roy shrugged when Grant glared. "What I am old. We speak in signs and weather now." Hannah had already pulled on her coat. "We removed the roof snow." Grant turned. "No one climbs up there. No one needs to." She pointed toward the woodpile, then to 2 long lodgepole saplings leaning under the shed roof. "We make a rake." Roy's eyes brightened with the pleasure of practical trouble. Within an hour, they had built a long snow rake from 2 straight poles lashed together, a light crosspiece, and a rope brace that let them pull without twisting the head sideways. Grant wanted to clear the whole kennel roof from one side. Hannah stopped him. "Evenly. It is snow, not explosives. Weight does not care what branch of service trained you." Roy made a small strangled sound and pretended to cough. Grant looked at Hannah with irritation and beneath it reluctant respect. "Fine. Evenly." They worked from the ground, taking shallow bites from one side, then the other, dragging loose powder first and hardened layers slowly after. The old snow resisted, crusted into slabs beneath the new fall. Each time a sheet slid, the roof answered with a low sigh. Not relief exactly. More like a man loosening a belt after a hard meal. Inside, Miriam kept the puppies warm and called their weights through the window every hour because Hannah had asked, and because being useful had begun to soften the fear in her face. Tucker gained 1 ounce. Molly gained half. Miriam announced both facts with the solemnity of court evidence. Scout limped between porch and window, deeply offended that roof maintenance did not require his leadership. Wayne Carver returned near noon on his snowmobile, drawn perhaps by the sight of 3 adults wrestling the sky with sticks. He cut the engine and laughed. "You folks know spring melts that for free." Grant braced for anger from Hannah, but she only rested the rake against her shoulder. "Spring has poor timing." Wayne shook his head. "That roof has stood since Grant's father built the place." Roy pointed at the pantry door through the window. "Doorframe disagrees." Wayne waved a gloved hand. "Doors swell." Hannah looked up at the shallow dip near the vent pipe. "Roofs speak before they fall. People just prefer shouting." Wayne's smile turned sly. "You always talk like that, or only when men are cold enough to listen." Grant took 1 step forward. Hannah raised a hand without looking at him. "She could handle a fool. The mountain would handle the rest. Only when there is work," she said, "which means often." Wayne snorted and rode away. Grant watched him go. "I should have told him to shut his mouth. You moved the rake to the other side when I asked." That was louder. The answer embarrassed him more than praise would have. By late afternoon, the pantry door opened cleanly. The beam still bore its dark line, but the strain seemed to have eased. Roy inspected it with a lantern. "Brace it tonight. Proper repair when weather gives us permission." Grant ran a palm along the wood he had helped his father raise years before. He thought of combat operations where the first sign of danger was never the blast. It was the silence before the blast, the wire misplaced by inches, the dog refusing to move. He had trusted Scout then. He had trusted tiny signs because survival demanded humility. Somewhere after Leah died, he had stopped listening to small warnings at home. He had waited for collapse because collapse felt honest. Hannah had not. She heard drips, damp bedding, scraping doors, tired beams. She listened to the world as if it were always confessing. That evening, after the roof was cleared and the kennel braced, she proposed the guide rope. They sat at the kitchen table under the amber light of the oil lamp steam. From potato soup curling toward the beams. From porch to woodshed, Hannah said, drawing on scrap paper. Then to kennel, then barn, then well if we have enough rope. Grant stared. No one gets lost in his own yard. Miriam looked up from holding Molly. My cousin's husband froze behind his own dairy barn in Nebraska. Grant said nothing. Hannah's pencil rested on the page. Whiteout does not steal distance, it steals direction. That is worse. Roy nodded. I have rope. Stakes high enough to stay above the drift, Hannah said. Knots spaced wide enough to count with gloves. Branch line to the woodshed. Cloth on the first knot near the house. Why cloth? Grant asked. Because even blind fingers should know where home begins. The room went quiet at that. Grant looked at the paper, then at Hannah's hands. Those hands were not pretty in the soft way men wrote songs about. They were cracked, chapped, nicked from twine, reddened from washing bottles, and steady around anything fragile. We start now, he said. Roy groaned. Of course we do. Sleep is for people with paved driveways. They worked by lantern under snow that glittered and hissed. Roy drove lodgepole stakes into frozen ground with a sledge. Grant tied knots with the clean precision of a man who had trusted knots with his life. Hannah checked height and tension, adjusting each line so a person could keep one hand on rope while carrying wood or a crate. Scout followed them as far as the porch steps, then sat beneath the overhang, watching like an old commander forced into retirement. When Hannah tied a strip of blue cloth from her scarf at the first knot, Grant recognized the color from the morning she arrived. You will freeze without that. It was already torn. Still, she looked toward the buried path. Now it has a job. Grant touched the knot once. In the dark, the cloth felt ordinary. That was the beauty of it. Most things that saved lives were ordinary until the hour they were needed. Near midnight, Grant tested the line from porch to kennel. Snow blew hard enough to erase his footprints before he turned back. With one gloved hand on the rope, he walked into white nothing and felt after 6 steps his body start to angle right without his permission. The rope corrected him. He returned to the porch, pale and silent. Hannah was waiting with the lantern. Middle post needs another brace, he said. She nodded as if he had said thank you. The next evening, Wayne's headlights appeared near the lower fence through swirling snow, then vanished. Scout saw it first. He barked once, sharp and deep. Grant moved to the window. The white swallowed the road. No engine came closer. No engine retreated. The guide rope outside hummed in the wind like a plucked string, and from far across the buried yard, something metallic struck once, then went silent. By dawn, Frostline Ridge had become a place of half-seen shapes and warnings. The sky low and bruised above the white slopes, the air so still that every breath from the cabin chimney rose straight up before vanishing. Wayne Carver's missing headlights kept returning to Grant's mind. Though the man himself had staggered in before sunrise, cursing a dead battery and pretending the night had not frightened him. He had made it home by following the fence with one hand and luck with the other, and because pride hated witnesses, he acted as if luck had been his plan all along. Hannah gave him coffee and said nothing. That seemed to bother him more than any lecture. Storm watch says heavy snow, Wayne muttered, warming his fingers around the mug. Nothing biblical. Miriam glanced at the window where the world had lost even the fence posts. Men always know the size of trouble before it arrives. Wayne squinted at her. What is that supposed to mean? It means drink while it is hot. Roy chuckled into his beard. Grant did not laugh. He was watching the horses in the distant paddock beyond the barn. All of them turned away from the western ridge long before the wind came. Scout had refused breakfast, which worried him more than radio reports. The old dog stood near the door, head low, ears shifting at things beneath the silence. Hannah saw the same signs. She checked the barometer. The needle had fallen again. The creek below the road had gone quiet under ice, and even the small birds that usually fussed along the woodshed roof had disappeared. "We prepare for more than heavy snow," she said. Wayne set down his mug. "You people have been preparing since she got here. Surprised you have not knitted mittens for the porch rails." Tucker sneezed from the crate. Hannah looked at Wayne calmly. "He already has 4 socks and no respect for laundry." Grant's mouth moved. Miriam did smile this time, small and quick as a match being struck. Wayne shook his head and left before noon, refusing Hannah's suggestion that he bring his youngest dogs to the kennel before the road drifted shut. "My place has handled storms since before Grant had his first crew cut," he said. Grant did not rise to it. He only looked at Hannah after the door closed. "What do we do?" That question changed the kitchen. Miriam heard it. Roy heard it. Hannah heard the trust inside it, and something in her chest tightened with both gratitude and fear. Trust was a warm thing. Warm things could be lost. "We make the house smaller again," she said. They drew the blanket wall tighter around the stove. Roy helped move the puppy crate to a safer position, raised on boards with a strip of dry felt beneath but open at the top for air. Hannah placed smooth river stones beside the stove to warm slowly, then wrapped them in thick towels and tested them against her wrist, before sliding them near, never touching the puppy's bedding. She lined a low sled with blankets in case Tucker and Molly had to be moved to the kennel or barn. Grant hauled extra wood to the porch, stacking it within reach of the guide rope so no one would be tempted to walk blind. Roy tied a second branch of rope toward the barn, adding knots in groups of 3 at the turn. Miriam counted bottles, washed nipples, and wrote feeding times on the slate without asking Hannah's permission. The handwriting was different from Leah's and different from Hannah's, stiff and elegant, as if grief itself had learned to print. Hannah left it there. In the north room, she arranged dry towels by use, feed wipe, bedding, emergency. She counted formula packets again, then dog food, rice, oats, canned broth, potatoes, dried beans, and the jars of applesauce Leah had put up the summer before she died. Grant found Hannah staring at the pantry shelf with one jar in her hand. "Spoiled?" he asked. "No. Leah dated this one the week before the accident." He reached for it, then stopped. Hannah gave it to him. The glass was cool. The label read cinnamon, less sugar, because Grant makes a face. Grant let out a sound too rough to be laughter. "I did. She noticed. She noticed everything." Hannah turned back to the shelves. "Then we keep noticing." Outside, Roy and Grant checked the snow rake, the brace under the kennel beam, and the hay wall. The protected nail behind the hay carried only a pale kiss of frost. The exposed nail shone white. Wayne would have called that coincidence, but Wayne was not there, and Frost did not need applause. In the barn, Grant inspected feedwater buckets and the narrow stall where an older rescue shepherd named Daisy had been moved away from the draft. Daisy was gray and the muzzle stiff in both hips, and convinced that every human existed to bring her something softer. She leaned against Grant's leg and sighed as if disappointed in his overall performance. "Leah spoiled you," he said. Daisy licked his glove. Hannah appeared in the stall doorway with a bundle of burlap. "Good. Spoiled dogs fight to stay spoiled." She showed him how to make a warming nest that would not trap damp. Low sides, dry layers, vent gap, no hot stone against skin. "You already did this with the pups. Living things keep teaching the same lesson because we keep pretending each emergency is new." Grant looked at her through the dim barn light. Snow dusted her scarf. A strand of hair had escaped near her cheek. He wanted with sudden force to ask where she had been before the mountain handed her to his door. He knew Peace's truck in the ditch. Veterinary work rescue calls a dead husband beneath a logging wagon 5 years ago. No current home sturdy enough to matter. But questions could become hooks. He was afraid of reaching. So he said, "You could have kept driving before the road closed." "I tried." The ditch disagreed. "Before that?" Hannah folded burlap into the stall. "I had a room in town until the clinic cut staff. Then friends' couches. Then a job offer that turned out to be more hope than paycheck." She shrugged, but he saw the old bruise of it. Winter catches people who are already thin at the edges. Grant wanted to answer. The radio crackled from the house before he could. Miriam called from the porch, voice sharp. They ran inside along the guide rope as the wind began to rise, not yet violent, but carrying a new direction. The radio on the counter spat static, then a county alert broke through in fragments. "Blizzard warning. Travel impossible. Whiteout conditions. Shelter in place." The voice dissolved, returned once, and said 4 clear words that seemed to settle into the room like iron. "Shelter in place now." Scout barked toward the west wall. The cabin lights flickered. Tucker and Molly woke crying together, and outside, beyond the guide rope and the hay wall and every sensible thing they had built, the first true gust struck the ridge so hard, the whole house bowed its head. The blizzard hit Frostline Ridge shortly after midnight, and it did not arrive like weather. It arrived like an army without lanterns. Snow slammed against the north wall in hard, breathless bursts, then packed itself into every seam, every hinge, every small place where a warmer season had left room for mercy. The cabin windows disappeared behind white. The porch steps vanished. The line between earth and sky, between yard and road, between safe and lost, was rubbed away until the whole ridge became a single moving wall. Inside the winter room, the stove threw orange light across the blankets Hannah had hung from the beams. Tucker and Molly lay in their raised crate, wrapped near warm stones but never touching them. Their small bodies rising and falling in a rhythm that everyone in the room had begun to measure their own courage against. Scout stood facing the door. His torn ear twitched. His good leg held firm while the stiff one trembled from the cold that seeped up through the boards. Grant heard the wind, and beneath it other sounds his mind supplied without permission. Rotor blades chopping desert night. Radio static, a man breathing too fast. Beside him, Scout's younger bark in a place where snow had never fallen. He gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. Hannah saw it, but did not name it. Some wounds hated being called by their proper title in front of others. She put a folded towel into his hands. "Check the lower bedding." He looked at her, unfocused. "What?" "Tucker and Molly. Bedding. Feel for damp." The task reached him where comfort could not. Grant bent, touched the cloth beneath the pups, and found it dry. Dry. "Good. Bottle temperature next." He wrapped one hand around the waiting bottle. "Warm." "Like what?" His breathing slowed by half a measure, like a wrist you would not pull away from. "Good." Scout leaned hard against Grant's thigh. Not enough to knock him off balance, enough to remind him which decade he was standing in. Grant closed his eyes once and pressed his fingers into the dog's ruff. "I am here," he said quietly. Whether he told Scout or himself, Hannah did not ask. The first trip to the woodshed came at 1 in the morning. The firewood stacked on the porch would not last until dawn, with the wind stealing heat so greedily, and the stove could not be allowed to fall low while the puppies were still too small to hold warmth. Roy tied a rope around his own waist out of habit, then rolled his eyes when Miriam insisted on checking the knot. "Ma'am, I spent 30 years working around boats and mountain fools. Then you have had practice making bad decisions near ropes." Roy bowed his head. "Checked by authority." Grant opened the door. The storm punched into the room, snatching heat, ash, and breath. The guide rope outside thrashed like a live thing. Roy stepped out with one hand clamped around it and vanished within 4 feet. Grant followed to the threshold, not leaving the porch, but keeping sight of Roy's glove on the rope until even that disappeared. Hannah closed the door to a narrow crack and counted under her breath. 1 knot to the porch turn, 2 knots to the woodshed branch, 3 for the brace. The rope shook once, then twice, then steadied. Minutes stretched. In the crate, Molly woke and whimpered. Miriam gathered the warm towel, not waiting for instruction this time, and tucked it along the side where the draft had found the blanket wall. Tucker tried to climb over his sister and fell asleep halfway through the crime. "He has no dignity," Miriam whispered. Hannah smiled. "He is 5 weeks old. Dignity comes after the ears stand up." Grant heard that and almost laughed, but the storm swallowed the sound. When Roy returned, his beard was white with ice and his arms full of wood. He stomped inside, breathing hard. Could not see the shed from the shed. "Rope held?" Hannah asked. Roy nodded. "Rope held." He looked at Grant. "Middle post sang like a church bell. Needs checking when God stops throwing the weather sideways." At 3, the lights flickered and died. The generator coughed once in the shed, then went silent under the snow. Grant swore softly. Hannah had already set lanterns within reach earlier that evening. Miriam lit one, then another, hand steady now, because there was no time left for fear to wander. The room shrank to amber and shadow. The hay wall outside took the worst of the wind. Hannah checked the protected nail inside the north room with her bare fingertip. Cold, but not killing cold. The exposed wall near the pantry shone with frost around its nailhead. The lesson was written plainly. Wayne would have hated it. The kennel beam creaked. It did not crack further. The old roof, cleared of its dead weight, accepted the new snow grudgingly but held. At 4, the guide rope jerked 3 times from the direction of the barn. Grant was on his feet before the 3rd pull ended. "Roy, signal from the branch line," Hannah said, already tying her scarf. "Barn or kennel?" Scout barked, then ran to the door, slipping once on the rug. Grant grabbed his coat. Miriam stepped in front of the puppy crate. "You are not taking them into that." Hannah wrapped 2 warmed stones in heavy towels and slid them beneath the prepared sled, separated by a plank so no heat touched bedding directly. "If the cabin fire fails while everyone is outside, they die here alone. If the barn needs hands and I stay here, someone dies there. We move as a unit or we choose who matters less." Miriam's face went pale. "They are so small." "Yes." Hannah lifted Molly, then Tucker, placing them in the sled nest under Leah's fleece. "That is why they do not get left behind." Grant looked at Hannah across the lantern light. The old part of him, the mission part, recognized what she had done. She had named the risk without decoration. She had chosen the living over the comfortable story. He nodded once. "Roy stays at the door if he is back. Miriam on the rope, behind Hannah. I take lead with Scout." "Your shoulder," Hannah said, "is attached." "That was not my question." He met her eyes. "I will not be stupid with it." Roy burst through the door, then half covered in snow. Kennel's side door is drifting shut. Daisy is trapped in the old stall and something shifted inside. Grant took the sled handle. Scout lunged into the storm, then stopped at the first knot, waiting. The path was gone. The rope remained. Hannah set one hand on the line, Miriam's hand behind hers. Grant ahead with the sled, Roy at the rear. The door opened and the blizzard swallowed them whole. Outside, Frostline Ridge had no ground. No sky and no distance, only the guide rope cutting through the white, like a promise someone had remembered to tie in advance. Grant leaned into the storm with the low sled behind him. Tucker and Molly tucked under Leah's fleece, the warmed stones wrapped below them. and Hannah's hand checking the bedding every few steps. Scout moved at Grant's side, shoulder brushing his knee, vanishing and reappearing in bursts of lantern light. Snow struck Hannah's cheeks like thrown sand, her eyelashes iced together at the corners. Behind her, Miriam gripped the rope with one hand, and the sled rail with the other, her burgundy coat snapping so hard it sounded like canvas tearing. Roy brought up the rear, muttering steady complaints at the storm, at his boots, at the young, at the old, and at Idaho in general. It helped. Ordinary grumbling kept terror from finding too much room. At the kennel door, the drift had climbed almost to the latch. Grant kicked and shoveled with his boot, then stopped when his shoulder flared white-hot through the joint. He had promised not to be stupid with it. Promises made under lantern light still counted in snow. "Roy," he said. The older man stepped in without a word, chopping at the drift with a short-handled shovel. Hannah shielded the sled with her body while Miriam held the fleece down around the puppies. Tucker protested once, a muffled squeak beneath the cloth. Molly remained quiet, but when Hannah slipped 2 fingers near her chest, the little heartbeat tapped back fast and determined. "Still with us," Hannah said. Grant heard her through the wind and felt something in him unclench. They forced the kennel door open just wide enough to slip inside. The air within was colder than the cabin, but calmer than the yard. The brace under the old beam held. Snow blew through a gap near the side door where the latch had bent under pressure, dusting the floor in a white tongue that reached toward Daisy's stall. Daisy, the gray-muzzled rescue shepherd, lay trapped behind a half-fallen panel, whining low. Her back legs had tangled in a loose lead when she tried to escape the shifting door. Grant moved toward her, but Scout reached her first, nosing her muzzle, then looking back with an urgency that needed no translation. "Easy, girl," Grant said. His voice changed around frightened animals. It went lower, older, less guarded. Hannah noticed. So did Miriam. Roy wedged the door gap with a board while Grant lifted the fallen panel enough for Hannah to slide in. "Do not pull the lead straight," she said. "It will tighten around the hock." Grant froze. "Tell me." "Lift the leg toward her belly, slack first." He obeyed. Daisy trembled so hard the straw shivered beneath her. Scout lay down nose to nose with her, making a soft chuffing sound Grant had only heard him use once before beside an injured handler years ago. Hannah freed the lead, then ran her hands along Daisy's hips and ribs. "No break, cold and scared." "Join the club," Roy said, hammering the temporary brace into place. Miriam had already carried the puppy sled toward the inner stall Hannah had prepared the day before. "Where do I put them?" Her voice was sharp but steady. "On the raised pallet, not near the door. Check the stone wraps. If they feel hot, move them farther apart." Miriam did exactly that. No argument, no inspection, no suspicion, just work. Hannah saw the change and stored it away for later when there might be time to feel it. There was not time now. Tucker's body temperature began to slip after the move. The cold had taken advantage of every transfer, every open door, every second of exposed air. He would not latch to the bottle. His mouth gaped, offended but weak. Grant's face drained. "Hannah, dry first." "He is dry." Then warmer slowly. She wrapped Tucker in a fresh cloth, tucked him against the inside of her coat, and sat on the straw with her back to the stall wall. "No hot bottle, no rubbing hard. We wake him, not punish him." Grant knelt in front of her, useless hands open. He hated useless hands. Hannah looked at him. "Talk to him." "What?" "He knows your voice." Grant stared at the pup. He had spoken orders in storms before. Coordinates, corrections, last words into radios. Speaking hope to a creature smaller than his boot felt harder. "Tucker," he said. The puppy did not move. Grant swallowed. "You are trouble. Everyone knows it. You cannot leave your sister with all the manners." Roy's hammer paused. Miriam closed her eyes. Scout shifted closer, pressing his warm flank against Hannah's knee. Grant continued, voice rough. You hear me. You still owe me a bottle nipple, 2 towels, and an apology for that thing you did on my clean shirt. Tucker's paw twitched. Hannah touched a drop of milk to his tongue. He swallowed. Once. The smallest miracle, but the kennel seemed to brighten around it. She waited, then gave him another. There, she whispered. Come back slow. Daisy had stopped whining. Molly rooted against the fleece and bumped her sisterless nose into Miriam's wrist. This one is angry, Miriam said. Good, Hannah answered. Anger burns. For nearly an hour they worked in narrow circles of lantern light. Roy braced the side door. Grant changed damp straw and brought Daisy closer to the protected stall. Miriam warmed towels and kept Molly fed. Hannah coaxed Tucker back sip by sip, never rushing, never letting relief make her careless. The kennel smelled of wet wool, warm milk straw, and dog breath. Outside, the storm hammered the building, but every preparation Hannah had insisted on answered in turn. The raised pallet kept the puppies off the frozen floor. The vent gap carried damp air upward. The guide rope outside kept them connected to the house. The hay wall had spared the north room enough that extra towels and formula remained dry. Leah's notes had become hands none of them could see. Grant looked at the field shelf in the corner where Leah's old rescue tags hung in a row, and for the first time her absence did not feel like an accusation. It felt like a hand at his back. Near dawn, Tucker latched properly. Hannah let out a breath that shook. Grant saw the tremor and reached for the bottle so she could rest her fingers. Their hands touched around it. Neither pulled away. Then something slammed against the outer kennel door. Once. Twice. Scout sprang to his feet, barking. Roy grabbed the shovel. Grant reached for the lantern. A voice came through the storm, cracked and nearly gone. Grant! The door burst inward against the drift, just enough to show Wayne Carver on his knees in the snow. His face gray with cold, 3 half-frozen shepherd pups bundled against his chest under a tarp stiff with ice. My roof went, he gasped. I could not see the house. I found your rope. The second day of the blizzard opened over Frostline Ridge without light, only a darker shade of white moving beyond the kennel door while Wayne Carver collapsed across the threshold with 3 freezing pups and the last of his pride frozen to his coat. Grant caught him under the arms before he struck the floor, and pain flashed through Grant's bad shoulder so hard his vision sparked at the edges. He did not drop Wayne. He also did not try to carry him alone. Roy, he said through his teeth. Roy moved in fast, taking Wayne's weight. Hannah was already reaching for the pups. They were younger than Tucker and Molly, mixed shepherds from Wayne's winter litter. Their coats soaked flat, their bodies too limp for the noisy protest puppies ought to make when the world offends them. Wayne tried to hold on. Do not take them. I am not taking them from you, Hannah said. I am taking the cold from them. The words cut through his panic. His fingers opened. Miriam spread dry towels on the raised pallet without being asked. Daisy lifted her gray muzzle from the straw and gave Wayne a look of enormous disapproval, as if roof failure were a personal weakness. Scout stood between the open door and the room, barking until Roy forced the door shut against the storm. Names? Hannah asked. Wayne blinked at her lips blue. What? Their names. Say them. Bo, June, Little Red. Good. Grant Bo gets towel first, Miriam June. Roy water warm not hot. Wayne, you keep talking to Little Red. Wayne stared at the tiny pup in Hannah's hands. I do not know what to say. Grant knelt beside him, his own shoulder held tight against his ribs. Tell him what he owes you. Wayne looked at Grant as if he had lost sense. Then his face crumpled. You chewed my glove, you little thief. Hannah rubbed Little Red with firm, careful strokes, drying before warming. The rule repeated until it entered everyone like a hymn. Dry first, slow warmth, clear nose, small sips, no panic disguised as help. Wayne's voice broke. You ate the corner off my wife's cookbook. She blamed me for putting it too low. Little Red's mouth opened weakly. Wayne bent closer. That's it. You still owe me an apology. Grant saw himself an hour earlier and looked away to give the man privacy he had not been granted by the storm. The pups did not recover quickly. Nothing honest did. Bo swallowed 3 drops, then gagged. June shivered so hard Miriam had to change towels twice. Little Red lay still long enough that Wayne began whispering prayers under his breath, half-formed and rusty with disuse. Hannah did not interrupt. Faith sometimes came back to people the way warmth came back to animals. Slowly, painfully, beginning at the center. Scout lay beside the smallest pup, not touching, lending the room his steady breathing. Tucker and Molly slept in their own nest, unaware that their little kingdom had gained refugees. Daisy sighed whenever anyone stepped too close to her tail. Even in crisis, the kennel held ridiculous life. That was what saved them from despair. When Bo finally squeaked, Wayne covered his face with both hands. Roy muttered, ugly sound. Best sound I heard all year. The storm roared overhead. The brace under the beam groaned, then settled. Grant checked it with a lantern and found no new crack. He looked toward Hannah. She was changing Little Red's towel, her hair fallen loose from its scarf, a streak of straw across one cheek. Exhaustion hollowing the skin beneath her eyes. Beautiful was not the word he reached for. Necessary came first, then brave, then more dangerous than either deer. He turned away before the thought could show. Wayne, wrapped in a blanket near the feed bins, watched every system he had mocked keep working. The guide rope that he had called a leash had led him through nothingness when his own landmarks vanished. The raised pallet held the pups above frozen boards. The stored towels were dry because Hannah had opened Leah's room before water ruined it. The roof still stood because snow had been raked before pride made disaster theatrical. The hay wall kept the north side from freezing so deeply that formula and medicines remained usable. No one said this to him. Nobody needed to. Shame when it has good soil grows without watering. By afternoon, Wayne could speak without his teeth striking together. My kennel roof caved over the empty run, he said. Young ones were in the side pen. I got them out, but the trough was buried. Could not see the house from 10 feet. I thought I was walking toward my porch. Grant tightened a bandage around his shoulder. You found the middle post. Wayne nodded, staring at the floor. Hit it with my knee. Nearly cursed the thing until I felt the rope. He looked at Hannah. I followed the knots. The blue cloth told me I was near your porch. I thought that was foolish when I saw you tie it. Hannah lifted June and checked her gums. Many useful things look foolish while conditions are polite. Wayne winced. Roy grinned. That is going on your headstone. Not soon, I hope, Miriam said. By evening, all 3 of Wayne's pups had taken small feedings. Wayne himself slept sitting up against a hay bale, one hand resting near Little Red's nest. Grant went with Roy along the guide rope to retrieve more wood from the porch stack. The storm had buried half of it, but not all. When they returned, Hannah was at the slate board updating counts. Formula lower. Towels enough if rotated, firewood tight, dog food enough, human food long enough if no one wasted. Grant stood behind her, reading over her shoulder. Long enough, he asked, if we behave. Tucker has already refused. She smiled tiredly. He is exempt on grounds of being ridiculous. Grant wanted to touch her shoulder. He did not. Instead, he said, You saved Wayne's pups. Hannah capped the charcoal. We kept them alive until they could help us. You always say that. Because saving sounds like one person doing all the work. Living usually takes a crowd. Grant looked around the kennel, Miriam warming towels, Roy repairing a latch. Wayne sleeping beside his pups, Scout guarding the door, Leah's labels above dry supplies, Tucker and Molly breathing in their nest because Hannah had come through the snow and asked to stay. "A crowd," he said softly. The third morning began with the wind still savage but changing, not weaker, stranger. It circled the buildings instead of striking from one direction, carving drifts into new shapes. Scout grew restless. He paced from the kennel door to the window, whining under his breath. Grant thought he needed to go out. Hannah checked the rope through the cracked door and saw only white. "Not yet." Scout barked once, sharp enough that Tucker woke. Then the old dog slipped past Grant's leg with a speed none of them expected from his stiff hip. "Scout!" Grant lunged, but the dog was already outside, swallowed by storm before the door could be pulled shut. Grant grabbed the guide rope and followed 3 steps, but Roy caught his coat. "You go blind now, we lose both of you." Grant fought him until his shoulder buckled. Hannah shoved the lantern into Miriam's hands and dropped to the threshold, searching the snow. A small red mark appeared near the first knot, then another bright and terrible against the white, leading not toward the barn or woodshed, but toward the old well beyond the branch line. Scout barked somewhere in the storm once, then again farther away and full of warning. The third morning over Frostline Ridge was a world erased in white. But the wind had begun to loosen its grip by the smallest degree, as if even the blizzard had grown tired of its own anger. Scout's bark came again from beyond the guide rope, faint and hoarse. And Grant Whitaker heard in it the command that had once carried him through darker places than snow. He stopped fighting Roy's hold, not because he was calm, because panic wasted time and Scout had never wasted time in his life. Hannah tied a second rope around Grant's waist, then around her own. Miriam stood at the threshold with the lantern cupped close to her body. "You cannot go beyond the line," she said. Her voice shook, but she did not block them. "We are not going beyond it blind," Hannah answered. "We extend it." Roy drove a spare stake into the packed snow at the porch edge while Grant tied a fresh line to the first blue cloth knot. Every movement had to be done by feel. Gloves fumbled, wind stole breath. The red marks near the porch were small, likely from Scout's torn pad or ice-cut leg, but they glowed in Grant's mind like flares. He had ordered Scout to stay behind in firefights and watched him obey with trembling restraint. He had trusted the dog to find explosives, injured men, hidden danger. Now Scout had disobeyed for the same reason. There was something out there. Hannah took the lantern shielded by her coat and moved one step at a time with Grant ahead of her. Roy anchoring the new rope from the porch until they reached the first buried fence post. Snow surged around their knees. The old well sat beyond the usual path, capped with a wooden cover Grant had meant to replace in the fall. He had not. The thought struck like a blow. The bark came again, close now from low to the ground. "Scout!" Grant called. A dark shape appeared through the blowing snow. Scout lay stretched near the well, front paws dug into the crusted edge where the cover had shifted under a drift. One hind leg hung awkwardly and blood dotted the snow beneath his pad. He did not come when called. He barked at Grant, then at the ground in front of him. Hannah lifted the lantern higher. The snow beside the well had collapsed into a hidden hollow, leaving a crescent-shaped gap where anyone following the old path to the barn could have stepped straight through onto the broken cover. Beneath it, black water glimmered. Grant's stomach turned cold in a way no weather could explain. If Scout had not run out, the next person carrying wood in a whiteout might have vanished 10 yards from home. Grant dropped to his knees. "Good boy," he said, voice breaking. "You stubborn old soldier." Scout whined, then tried to rise and failed. Hannah crawled forward on her belly, distributing her weight, and looped a strap behind Scout's chest. "Do not pull straight back," she said. "Angle left, away from the weak cover." Grant obeyed. Roy at the rope behind them took the strain. Together they slid Scout away from the hollow inch by inch, while the old dog grumbled in deep offense at being rescued without dignity. When he was clear, Grant wrapped both arms around him and held on. Scout's fur smelled of snow blood and the warm animal musk that had kept Grant alive after war when human rooms felt too quiet to bear. "You came back for me so many times," Grant whispered into his ruff. "Let me come back for you." Hannah pressed a cloth to Scout's bleeding pad, checked his hip, his ribs, his gums. Cut pad, strained leg, cold but not gone. Not gone. Grant bowed his head over the dog, and for a moment the storm, the grief, the broken well. Leah's empty coat, all of it moved through him without finding a place to stay. They marked the hazard with 2 crossed stakes and a tied scrap of red cloth from Roy's bandana, then brought Scout back along the extended rope. At the doorway, Miriam was crying openly. She did not hide it. She knelt in the snow and touched Scout's head with both hands. "Leah always said you were too smart to be polite." Scout sighed against her glove as if agreeing at last with something sensible. Inside the kennel had become a crowded, breathing arc of warm towels, damp coats, sleeping pups, anxious humans, and one very insulted old German shepherd laid beside the stove on Leah's fleece. Tucker and Molly nosed toward him as soon as Hannah allowed them near. Tucker tried to climb onto Scout's shoulder. Scout lifted his head just enough to give the pup a look of veteran disappointment, then let him remain. Molly curled against the old dog's chest. Grant sat on the floor beside them because standing seemed unnecessary. Hannah bandaged Scout's paw with practiced hands. When she finished, Grant caught her fingers. He did not mean to. Or he did and had finally run out of reasons to pretend otherwise. "Thank you," he said. The words were too small. They were also all he had. Hannah looked at his hand around hers, then at the room around them. "We are still in the storm." "I know. Then thank me when we have dishes to wash and chores to complain about." Grant smiled, tired and true. "Deal." By late afternoon, the wind fell from a roar to a long, exhausted moan. By night, snow still came down, but it fell instead of attacking. The roof held, the hay wall held, the kennel brace held, the guide rope held, the old well was marked before it could take anyone. Wayne's pups lived through their small, ragged feedings. Daisy slept with her nose under Miriam's hem. Tucker and Molly, Leah's last shepherd, slept against Scout's side while the old dog pretended not to need them. When daylight finally returned after 3 days and 2 nights, Frostline Ridge looked buried almost to the windowsills. The world had become hills and humps, fence posts and roofs rising from snow like the remains of some white ocean. But the cabin stood, the kennel stood. The supplies stayed dry. Not one dog had frozen, not one person had gone missing. Wayne walked the guide rope in silence, touching each knot with gloved fingers. At the blue cloth, he stopped. "How far apart did you tie them?" he asked Hannah. "Far enough to count with numb hands. And the first one blew, so home has a beginning." She nodded. Wayne swallowed. "Would you show me how to run one to my place when the snow settles?" Grant did not answer for her. He only looked at Wayne until the man turned fully toward Hannah. "Would you?" She smiled faintly. "Yes." Miriam spent the morning in the north room reading Leah's labels and touching the rescued supplies. Then she carried Leah's field notebook to Hannah, not to give it away, but to place it on the table between all of them. "I came here believing you were standing where my daughter should be." Her voice trembled. "I was wrong. You were standing where love needed another pair of hands." Hannah's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "I never wanted to replace her. I know that now." Miriam looked toward Tucker and Molly sleeping under Leah's fleece. "I will not take them to Boise. Leah brought them here. You kept them here. Grant must learn to raise them without acting as if needing help dishonors the dead." Grant lowered his head. Yes, ma'am. And you, Miriam added, turning to Hannah, must stop speaking of yourself as a woman passing through. Hannah had no answer ready. That alone told Grant how deeply the words had landed. Spring came late to Frostline Ridge, but it came. Snow pulled back from the hay wall. Sound bales became bedding. Wet ones were hauled away before they could sour. Roy repaired the well cover with enough bracing to satisfy 3 generations of cautious ancestors. Wayne returned with posts, rope, and no jokes. He learned the knots. He built raised shelves. He asked Hannah how to angle canvas so meltwater ran away, and when she answered, he listened like a man who had found religion in practical form. Miriam visited every Sunday with pies, clean towels, and opinions that nobody requested and everyone secretly needed. Daisy gained weight. Scout healed slowly, limping with renewed authority. Tucker and Molly grew into their paws, then into their ears, then into a shared talent for stealing Roy's gloves and hiding them under the porch. One bright April morning, Grant found Hannah in the yard, planting hardy greens beside the kennel. Her sleeves rolled sunlight, catching the gold in her hair. Tucker pounced badly at a clump of thawed grass. Molly barked at him for incompetence. Scout lay in the sun like an old king. Grant stood where Hannah had first asked to stay, the doorway behind him open now, without fear. I owe you more than shelter, he said. Hannah kept pressing soil around the seedlings. You owe me 1 bottle nipple, 2 towels, and an apology from Tucker. He remains legally unavailable. She laughed. The sound crossed the yard and settled somewhere in the beams of the house. Grant stepped closer. I am not asking you to stay because I need someone to raise Leah's shepherds. Hannah looked up. Then why? He looked at the kennel, the rope, and the repaired well, the old dog sleeping in sun, the 2 pups rolling in mud where snow had nearly taken them. Because when something starts to crack, I want you beside me before it breaks. Because this place is not smaller with you in it. Because I think Leah's love built a room large enough for the living to keep growing. Hannah stood very still. Then her smile came slowly, warm and a little afraid, which made it honest. You still wait too long to fix things, Grant Whitaker. I am improving. Scout may dispute that. The old dog thumped his tail once without opening his eyes. Hannah looked toward the mountains where the last snow shone under the spring sun. I am not staying to patch your life. She reached for his hand, and this time neither of them pretended it was an accident. I am staying so we can build something that lasts. Behind them, Tucker sneezed into a flower bed. Molly barked at the sky. Grant laughed and the sound did not break. Frostline Ridge entered the growing season, marked by loss, weathered by winter, and held together by ropewood, faithful paws and hands willing to keep noticing. Wisdom had not saved them because it was loud. It saved them because it was ready before the storm asked its question. The lesson of Frostline Ridge is simple enough to carry into any ordinary day. Love is not proven only by grand speeches or perfect courage. Often it is proven by warm towels, checked locks. A phone call made before pride says it is necessary, and the humility to listen when life whispers that something is wrong. God often sends help in plain clothes, through people we did not expect and through duties we did not choose. If this story touched your heart, comment Amen as a small prayer for every lonely person trying to keep a home. Standing through a private storm. Share it with someone who needs to remember that needing help is not weakness. Subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances. May the Lord bless your home, soften old grief, strengthen tired hands, and guide you back to love before the storm grows too loud.